Hi, my name's Chris Smith from Storytelling Schools, and today I'm here to tell you the story of this island of Britain from 12,000 years ago to the present day. 12,000 years may seem a long time, but, well, I'm 60 or nearly 60. Next year I'll be 60 years old. 12,000 years is 200 times that. That's like 200 times my lifespan. That means 12,000 years ago. And that's where our story starts today. Because once upon a time, this island of Britain was covered in a mountain of ice, so thick that it ground the rock underneath it into soil. And then the world warmed, and the ice melted, leaving a carpet of soil on this land. And seeds came in the wind and with the birds, and soon Britain was covered in a mantle of green forest, so thick that if you had climbed the tree that would have been growing just here, you could have climbed from branch to branch in any direction and got to the edge of the land without your feet touching the ground. The forest was full of wolf and bear and boar and eagle and snake, teeming with life, but not yet humans. And then they came from the east. They didn't need a boat, they walked here, because still there was a land bridge from the east connecting what we call France today with this country. They would have walked here wearing the skins of animals they had killed, and they would have lived in the caves around the coast, living off fish and shellfish and hunting in the forests and gathering whatever seeds and nuts and roots they could. They were hunters and gatherers, a precarious kind of existence where if you didn't get meat or fish to eat, your family would die. Time passed for a while like this, and then new settlers came from the east. This time they brought stone axes and showed the people how to cut down trees and clear the forests, and in those clearings build houses. This was new, wooden houses made out of trees and thatch, round houses they called them. This meant that our ancestors didn't have to just look for a cave and live there. They could choose the place they lived and build their own homes there for the first time. And soon the forest was being cleared and clusters of huts settled here and there in the forest. And they called themselves villages, the first group human settlements on this island. Others came with news of seeds and agriculture. They showed the people how to clear the forest and plough the soil and sow seeds in it, so that food could be grown for eating all year round. And they brought animals that could live in small fields, and those animals could be eaten and their milk could be drunk. In this way, agriculture came to this island. No more just hunting and gathering. Now there was food and, if you were lucky, a better chance of having food all year round. Less children died and people lived longer with a healthier diet. In this way, time passed. And others came and taught about the weaving of wool and the making of cloth and the making of pots from clay. Many things people learned. The grinding of grain to make bread. And with each new innovation, life got better. Time passed, and this land became an island. As the sea rose, the sea surrounded it, and people could only get here from then on by boat. And after a while, a new kind of person came. They were called blacksmiths, and they had a special power. They knew how to change rock and soil into a thing they called metal, something that was hard and tough and useful. The first metal was bronze, and the people used it to tip their arrows and their spears and make pots and make jewelry and make many things. And then after some time, new blacksmiths came with a second metal, iron. They used iron ore to smelt it in great fires, and from it came very hard, shiny metal iron. and they used it to make spears and swords and pots and tools and all sorts of things for farming and making and fighting. This was the age of iron. And time passed like this, and then a new group came to this island, the Romans. They came with their army and they conquered most of this island with their great shields and their great swords. The Britons who lived here were not strong enough to fight against them, even though sometimes they tried. And during this period of Roman rule, many new things came that were not here before. They built great straight roads so that it was possible for their armies to march from one end of this land to another. And they built towns with stone houses in them where their people would live and where people would come to trade and swap. They brought the idea of money so that instead of just swapping and bartering like they had before, now you could get money for the thing that you were sold and buy things with it later. They brought the arts, they brought trade, they brought knowledge from other countries, they brought many things that the Britons had not imagined before. One of the things they brought was their religion. When they came, it was a religion of sky gods and sea gods and earth gods, a kind of pagan religion. But before they left, a new religion came, Christianity, the religion of Jesus and his one Father, the one true God. And by the time the Romans left, Christianity was the religion of this island. After they left, it was a difficult period, a dangerous period to be a Briton. Many invaders came, the Angles, the Saxons and the Vikings, fighting over pieces of the island, setting up small kingdoms, one at war with the other. If you lived here in those days, our ancestors would have been not safe to travel from one town to the next. They would have been at the mercy of the bands of robbers and the armies which roamed this island. It was a difficult time. But then the Normans came. 1066, that's the date, and after the Battle of Hastings, William the Conqueror came, and with his army he took over most of this land. They're called the Normans because they came from Normandy, and they started a line of kings that ruled for many, many years. They brought castles so that their armies would be strong. They brought churches so that the peoples would worship. They brought taxes so their people went around collecting money and goods from the people of Britain, which went to the king. That means that the Norman kings became richer and richer, and therefore stronger and stronger, because they had the money to pay people to join their armies. In this way, the Normans ruled this island for many, many years. Time passed, and the Tudor age began with the line of Tudor kings. You may have heard of one of them, Henry VIII, famous for his 6 wives. Henry had a problem. He didn't want to stay with his first wife, but the head of the Christian church, the Pope, said that he could not divorce her. So he decided to form his own church, and then he gave himself permission to divorce her, and that's what happened. This is how the Church of England began so many years ago. The time of the Tudor kings was a time of expansion and exploration. Ships went out from Britain all over the world, found new countries, claimed them for Britain, and started to trade in all sorts of cloth and spices that they found in these new lands. It was a time of adventure and exploration and the beginning of the thing that they call the British Empire. Time passed, and the next line of kings and queens to rule this island were the Stewards. Perhaps the most important thing that happened during their reign was the Civil War. This is what happened. Until then, the kings and queens of England had pretty much done what they wanted if they had the power to. But during the Civil War, a man named Oliver Cromwell said that citizens had rights too, and the king should not just do what he or she wanted. There should be a parliament elected by the people, and they should have a say too. Cromwell wrote a Bill of Rights which spelt out what rights citizens should have. And this was the beginning of the rule of law that we see today in our country, and the beginning of the Parliament, which today is elected by the people. All of this happened in the Stuart times. By then, England was covered in big towns that they called cities because they were so huge. But these cities, they didn't have running water, they didn't have sewage, and they were built out of wooden houses crammed very close together. And in London, the biggest city in those days, there was a plague. A plague where a disease was spread from person to person and from house to house, killing maybe 1/3 of the people of London. It was terrible. And then, just a few years later, there was a fire in London, and 1/3 of the city was burnt down. These were famous disasters that happened during the reign of the Stuarts. Next was the era of the Hanover kings. This was a time of industry. Industry meant that for the first time machines were made to make things. The first one was a steam-driven loom which could spin and weave cotton, which until then had been made by hand. It meant that with fewer people you could produce much more cotton than before, much cheaper. And so the machines made money for the people who owned them. This was the beginning of what was called the Industrial Revolution. More and more machines were invented and put into factories, and people came from the villages to work in those factories to make all sorts of things that were then bought and sold in this country and in other countries. It was truly a great revolution. And to move things around, they built canals. The canals you see today in Britain were mostly built in those days to move things they needed to make in the factories and then to sell once the thing has been made. It was the beginning of a new era for this country. And then time passed again, and we come to the reign of Queen Victoria. By then there were factories and big cities all over the country, and an empire which spread over 1/4 of the world's surface. England was strong. It was the biggest superpower in the world, and proud of it. But then we come to the last century, the 20th century. In the 20th century, things changed fast. First, Britain and its great empire changed. Those countries that Britain had ruled over wanted to be independent, and one by one, Britain lost control of them until it just had pretty much its own country to look after, with 1 or 2 islands here and there. Also, during the last century, there were 2 world wars, huge wars, drawing in countries from all over the world where millions and millions of people were killed. The wars were vast and more terrible than anything that had been imagined before, because now there were guns and cannons and all sorts of machines that were able to kill people much faster than before. The 20th century was also a time of great inventions. Electricity was introduced into the towns and cities there, so that we could have lights and we could have all sorts of machines that ran off the electricity. Telephones were invented so we could speak to one another when we were not in the same room. Radios so we could hear things happening in other places, and then televisions so we could see them. All of these things and many more were invented in the 20th century. When the standard of living in the country got better and better, people got healthier and healthier and lived longer and longer lives. And now we come to today. Here it is, 2016. This is the digital age. The new thing now is the internet. With the internet, we can do many things. I can talk to somebody on the other side of the world whenever I want to. I can look up any information whenever I want to. I can do many things. I can use my iPad to make a film of me telling you this story, just like I am now, with this new and amazing technology of the 21st century. And think about it. That's how things are today. But just 12,000 years ago, just 200 lifetimes ago, Our ancestors had just moved into the caves wearing skins. None of this had happened. All of this was to come. How amazing that in such a short time so much could have changed to make the land that we are today. And as for the future, well, nobody knows what the future will bring, but one thing is certain. Just as things have changed and changed in the past, so too they will change in the future. And each of you, with the life that you lead and the work that you do, will be part of that change.